Okay, I'm
Okay,
starting.
just a second. Yeah, 1 minute.
Okay. Again, for the guys who came late, Mr. Vishal, maybe some guys heard about his CV. He's a trainer. He's a FIDE senior trainer. He has the highest title of trainers, which is FST. He's also an international master. So he's maybe one of the 4 FIDE senior trainers in India. In all of Asia, there is only 33, only 33 FIDE senior trainers in Asia, and only one in Africa, just for example. And Mr. Vishal Sareen has trained many IMs and GMs in India. So I think now he's ready to continue.
Okay, so third part in our series of evolution in chess is the great world champion. He was world champion for 6 years in all. Jose Raul Capablanca. Now, Jose Raul Capablanca was a product of the times, of the good times that existed then. The world was out of, the First World War had ended, and it was like everywhere. It was a great atmosphere. People were looking at everything with hope for a better tomorrow, etc. And there was happiness all around because the war had ended. And Capablanca was a child of the destiny itself, because just everything happened so wonderfully well for him. In a recent interview, when he was asked who should be the greatest world champion ever, Magnus Carlsen's reply was Capablanca, because of the ease and the simplicity at which he played chess, and his opponent never found the right answers. So very, very simple approach, an extremely talented player of his time, and some things came very naturally to him, like finding very, very finding the best replies, you can say, in the end game, supposing the best problems to his opponent. I think Magnus has also very extensively studied Capablanca, because Magnus Carlsen's he's obviously one of the greatest ever, but his super expertise also lies in the end games that he plays, and I'm sure Capablanca had something to contribute there. And the game, obviously, we'll move over to the end game part a little later. But first of all, I just want to show you how simple and correct approach can net you a very fantastic position out of nothing. Capablanca is white. He's playing with one of the other good players, Janowiecki. David Janowiecki was obviously, in his own time, a good player, a decent player of repute. He plays a6, and Capablanca quickly exchanged the bishops. We call it the exchange variation in the Ruy Lopez. Just played knight c3. Queen d6 and f6 are more commonly played options here, but black played bishop c5. Capablanca is playing on the concept of the fact that black has got double pawns on the queen side, and he wants to take advantage of that in due course of time. d3, bishop g4, and he will like to keep the position close because he has got knights against bishop. Bishop e3, maybe queen e7 was a better response, but black chose to play bishop e3, fe3. Now he also has a double pawn on the king side, but there is also another factor that White is in position to play a move like d4, and then he'll have a better center for sure. He already has a better center, but it can have more venom as the game progresses further. Queen goes to e7. Short castle is met with long castle. Long castle may not be the best move here, but okay, it's a possibility. Queen e1 he plays, obviously just walking his knight out of the pin. The bishop was pinning the knight. Maybe he wants to relocate the knight somewhere here, if possible, or maybe somewhere here. It depends as the game progresses, or he simply wants to put pressure with queen on g3, attacking this super weak point. This one, yeah. Yanowski here played knight h6. I want you to spend about 2 minutes on this position and tell me what should white do and why. Are you sure what you mean is correct? You want to create play on the king side, and for that you want to play a4 a5, or it should be queen side. Is that what you mean? Abhishek, I'm asking you. No. I don't need a one move solution, guys. And queen h4 also, I don't think it is in white's interest to exchange queens here. It doesn't really make much sense.
Are you there, Mr. Vishal?
Now I can. Okay. Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Abhay. Is it okay now, everyone? Now I accidentally pressed the mute button. And after that, I tried calling you. Yeah. Because I was not able to unmute myself. I think you just now you made me the host. Now this is good. Yeah. Let me be the host. I'll control this. Thank you. Thank you, Abhay. Can we yeah, continue? Yeah, sorry, Lab, these disruptions they cause your mind goes elsewhere. Okay, so knight at 6, yeah, the main point was, okay, somebody came up with a very nice idea of just pushing the pawn. I'd given 2 minutes, but we lost more than 5, it seems. And he said that maybe after that, sorry, oops, something is not right. Yeah, and followed by maybe he said knight a4 and b4 and knight c5. But my question to you is, after this, what? So you can bring your knight to c5 and then do what? Okay, it's not such a bad thing, really. I mean, if the knight can come to c5, it'll be good only. But I think this is a little bit slow process. It is, instead of doing this, maybe another good idea would be to just launch an attack on the black king. I think this is easily doable. Can someone suggest me how? It's something similar plan, but just opening lines on the queen side is what I'm saying. Very, very simple play. Can we have some answers quickly, please? Yes, Rajat. Perfect. Perfectly put. Yes, rook b1. It's such a calm and quiet move. You simply want to push a4, b4, b5 and just keep on pushing till black has got some serious weaknesses on the Queenside. He played f6, b4, started. Knight f7, a4, non-stop. b5 is coming next. Black decided to take bishop f3. Rook takes f3 and b6. What will you play here? Yes, Abhishek, you're right. Anyone else? Anyone else? Let's go fairly simple, in line with what we were planning so far. Just go b5 straight up. Well, AB doesn't doesn't give black anything. So you have to take CB5, AB5 and played A5. Just see, with very, very concrete play, concrete yet very simple. White has not been worried about exchanges right from move 3 or 4. He's just improving position as it happens. Knight to d5. Very logical. And now he's got a firmly placed piece in the middle of the board. Queen c5 was placed and he cements it with c4. Now just imagine when d4 happens, black is likely to collapse very quickly. So it's not that black made any significant errors or anything like that. White just kept on improving logically. One move after the other. There's not much to think also about these kind of moves. This is automatic moves, right? The c4 is an automatic move, for example. So b5, take, a5, knight d5, c4. Played knight g5, you must save the rook, which he did. Knight went to e6, queen c3. You're getting ready to play d4 at some point, and very quickly too. Rook d1, the rook has no job on b1 anymore, so it comes to d1. And finally d4 is achieved. He goes here. Rook c2, you're threatening c5 now, completely busting open the queen side. And here black made a significant error going for knight f4. But it basically meant nothing anyway. I think black is anyway hopelessly lost here. Just c5 followed by c6 check and winning the game. You just see, I mean, very, very effective, but very simple. It's like it's almost like White never had to think. Just keep making some natural moves. This was the greatness which I think Magnus was talking about. The simplicity with which he defeated all his opponents. Not once, not twice, but he even defeated, for example, Lasker in a match. And after, in fact, Magnus won this match. You know how many games he won? 4 games, right? Does anyone remember this score line? 7.5, 3.5 in a 14-game match, right? So Magnus won 4 games and drew the remaining. And the championship was over in 11 games. But in 1921, when Capablanca and Lasker played, which was incidentally Lasker's last World Championship match, the score was the same. Capablanca won 4 games, Lasker won 0. So Capablanca was the winner on that count with a similar score. Yeah, we've seen this Janowiecki now. Let's have a look at one of my other favorite. Where is that game? Yeah, here. Here. Now we will just see again the power of very, very simple chess, but this time leading into an end game, which he so beautifully converts that it is likely to itch into your memory for a long time. castles, queen e8. So his opponent is Saveli Tatakover, again a very, very strong player of his times. 1924 it was when these two played this game. So white is not afraid of exchanges. He just exchanges a couple of minor pieces. He's got a good center. White has got a good center. And he's got a good expansion plan on the queen side. A4. He took bishop f3, queen f3, and knight c6, stopping a5 for now at least. Rook b1, queen h3. Black played rook to f6, and white it's not doing much here other than just fixing out any future counterplay coming from black in the center. f4 met with knight a5, queen f3 coming back, t6. White's next plan is to play e4. He could have done that here also, right away, but he chose to play rook e1. It's better to have rook where the action is taking place. Queen d7 and e4 finally. F into e4, queen into e4, and g6. So here, if you just try to evaluate the position, white is definitely better. He has got more space, maybe a better center. He's got everything, he's got the bishop against the knight. The position is likely to become open in due course of time. But what is the most ideal setup for white to create more play or more pressure? What is the most ideal moves that white would want to play? Somebody please quickly reply. Rook e3 may not hold much ground here, Abhishek, but and also h3 does not, I do not see much of a point. The move that white would really want to play is maybe h4, h5, so that you can weaken this at some point of time. And it's time to take measures to work in that direction. Your one move was correct, although g3 was what was played. King f8, king g2, rook f7. h4. White is ready to cause, some serious weaknesses. Black succumbed to the pressure here. He should have played c5, right or wrong. c5 was the best move here. And, well, I'm not saying black is equalized or something, but black will have some counterplay if the position is open. But this way, if you're trying to close the position with d5, then what happened was white was very happy to play this endgame. Black thought that he was being smart because he had seen this continuation, that rook will become very active on c6 because the pawn is still on c7. But white gets there first. Just see this, rook h1, king f8, and white is the first to penetrate into the 7th rank. You have to note that white is not so much worried about losing these pawns, especially in the wake of the fact that, if you get your pawns here and here, and this is going to be terminally weak. And even if black is able to win this pawn, these pawns are way far behind to really cause any serious damage to white or white's aspirations, so to say. Rook c6. White continues with g4. You cannot really take. You should have played maybe g5 here. That was a decent move to play. But black chose to play knight c4. What would you do here? It is not only very simple, but very, I mean, very subtle approach. Simple, subtle, effective, all at the same time. I would like to hear some answers. Hmm. No, 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 Abhishek. This is not how Capablanca played his chess. No, 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 no. That's what I said. Like his end game was like simply too good to be true. It was like an amazing displays that he showed in all his end games. He was like a different class altogether when it came to. Mhm. Mhm. No, but that will give black sufficient play. Yeah, there are too many pawns that lose here. That will surely give black sufficient play. For example, somebody suggesting here that we take the knight, he takes with the rook and play rook d7. But I don't know what is to be done if take and king e7. If you give a check, then he probably can play king f7. I don't see any ways that white is going to win this position. No, I don't think white can win this anymore. No, no, this is not it. The move that he played was like an exceptional move, g5, fixing this pawn on a white square. Black played knight e3 check, king f3, knight f5. He should have played knight d1 to stay in the game. But he chose to play knight f5. What to do now? Let's not be in a hurry. I give everybody 3 minutes to explore this. Okay. अरे भाई कहीं नहीं जाऊंगा. अच्छा ठीक है मैं बंद कर दरवाजा बंद कर. Yeah, time up. No, I don't see any people in waiting room. No. Oh, sorry. This was our position. Bishop into f5, but what is the follow-up? You're losing c3 with check. This is what the most amazing thing about his endgames. He never really cared about, as long as the position was good, he's not worried about rook c3 going into a check. He in fact gives another pawn by check. Check, king h4 he goes. Rook f3, you leave one more pawn will go with check. Not really worried. G6, one pawn is enough to win. Rook into f4 check, king g5. Rook e4 he played, king f6. Now rook h8 is a mate. King g8 a check, and you take, forcing rook to go back. And now all these pawns will fall. Again this, check. King and pawn endgame is absolutely lost. I mean, you can't really take here because king d5 followed by king c6. So g7, king g8, rook a7, rook g1. And as I said, all the pawns are going to fall. And somewhere here, black resigned. Yeah. There's like a very good demonstration of his phenomenal endgame skills. And like I said, everything was made very simple and very pleasing. So this was Jose Raul Capablanca for you. And now it's time to move on to Alexander Alekhine. We will start with this position. This man was an epitome of success. He was like, I think in my opinion, one of the first complete chess players in the history. Like he knows his openings extremely well. He was a savage for his opponents in the middle game. He was like the Terminator, tormentor, call him what you like. and he was very, very good in his end games also. So like the first complete player in the history, Alexander Alekhine here. He has achieved a lot of success through his amazing combinational vision. A fantastic player. This is our first position. No, don't be in so much of a hurry, Abhishek. He just played c5 here, trying to open it up completely. I'm just going to show you the variations. I mean, it's just far too complicated. Okay. And also we are running a little bit out of time. So, I mean, we still have a lot to see compared to what I had in mind. So c5, black played b5, thinking that he's making a good defense. A b5, all the lines are now closed. Black king is being defended by white pawns, and black is hoping for some counterplay because he's got an extra piece. So he played knight e4 here. There could be some really decent moves for white to make, but the queen looks trapped. The queen has nowhere to go. Did he make a mistake? No, he had seen it. Played b6, gives up the queen, and just takes it with cd6. Just see this position. If you take on c2, another rook is going. So white would be a rook and a queen down. But then this is a beautiful checkmate. Queen and mate. And if you don't take the rook, then what is it that you actually played? Black chose to play rook c7, thinking he was smart. And white came up with this spectacular finish, b7, king b8. Obviously, bishop a7 doesn't work for now because b8 is under control. But can you imagine what white played just now? Can somebody tell me or think about it? I want some really quick answer. Yes. Very well done, Rajat. d7. This is a complete victory of the mind over matters, you know. Not an ordinary position at all. No matter what black does, black is lost. Gave a check, and he just moved the queen. It's just, you take whichever rook you like, you can take, but it's going to be mate. Or whichever pawn for that matter. Such was the brilliance. I mean, this position I just showed you because I wanted to basically emphasize on the fact that this guy was a brilliant chess player. There's no doubt about it. And in the history of chess, he's the only player who died when he was still world champion. No one has, apart from him, died as a world champion in chess. He was the only one. And he had a very disturbed life, you know, running from pillar to post here and there. The traveling was not so easy. A clear victim of the World War. If he used to travel, he would go to Germany. They will call him a Russian spy. When he comes back from Germany to Russia, they would call him a Nazi spy. And he spent a lot of time in jail, for example. And if the book by Kasparov is anything to believe, there was even once a shoot order on him, like just go shoot this guy, and you know, everything will be okay. I mean, he's the problem creator. Just go shoot him. And when they were about to shoot him, suddenly some soldier came running and said, no, 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 you cannot do that. This guy has the power to bring the world chess champions title to Mother Russia. So no Russian so far, although chess was immensely popular in Russia, and Russia those days was USSR. It was not a Russia of today. It was a Russia of which was massive in proportions. So they were like, I think when it first got disintegrated in 1992, it became into 17 countries. One USSR divided into 17 different countries. And that's how it was. It was really massive. And they said that he has the power. Although, as I said, chess was immensely popular, but nobody had become world chess champion by then, because Stenitz was from Austria, Lasker, Germany, and Capablanca was from Cuba. He was the only one, but as fate would have it, Alekhine was always looking at opportunities, and he was really disturbed. He was always looking for opportunities to be in some other part of the world other than USSR. So he ran away from Russia eventually. Ran away may be wrong, yeah. I mean, he got out of the country and never came back. So he lived, he won his first world championship as a player representing France, not Russia. Even today, well, I've not seen his tomb, but it says that on his tomb, it's written that this is Alexander Alekhine, a great chess player of the Russia and of the Championat. It says in French, it says something like Championat d'échecs, so which means champion of the chess and of the Russia and of the France, something like that. So they really consider him both a Frenchman and this. When he died, he was looking at a chessboard. I mean, his body was found. His dead body was found when he was still analyzing some position. I mean, chess history is immensely interesting if you want to know about it. Okay, I think this 28 players blindfold was not such a great deal, because with practice we have seen that people have done a lot more after him, and also I think after him essentially. Yeah. No, he was obviously a brilliant mind, Alekhine. There's no doubt about it. Abhishek, thanks for this update. We move over to the next game. His early years as a chess player was simply fascinating. You know, the amount of chess awareness that he had about attack and checkmate and just going after the king, etc. This was immense. Yeah, you know, this knight, just see how many knight moves he has made. But the knight has reached the correct square, e5. So it started from, it's the b1 knight, c3, e4, g5, f3, and e5. And now the second knight will join it. Not one of his greatest games, but what I'm simply saying is that eye for attack was so strong that every piece will actually land up at the right square. That was what the point was. Queen e2. He played c5. And now some serious fireworks. Knight f7. Just see this. If you go queen c8, queen into e6 is coming. So king f7. And now queen e6 anyway. If king e6, then this is checkmate. So his opponent played king g6, g4. Knight is pinned, pawn is pinned. You're threatening bishop f5, checkmate. Tried to stop, knight h4 mate. I mean, these are not his greatest of the victories. I'm just talking about the early years of Alekhine. What made Alekhine what he actually became later, the world chess champion. And the only, I mean, he was the only one who could beat Capablanca. And in fact, there's another very good story about this. Before the match, Alekhine was asked, like, do you think, are you going to win this match or something like that? And he said that on this entire planet, it is very difficult to find someone. The rule of that match was like whoever wins first 6 games, something like that. He said in whole of this planet, it is probably impossible to find anyone who can beat Capablanca 6 times. But at the same time, I want to tell you that it is also probably impossible to find someone who can beat Alexander Alekhine 6 times. So it will be a match and we will see. And with that, he defeated Capablanca in his World Championship quest. We will quickly go over one of his quick wins. Yeah, this is nice. He's playing against Geza Marozzi, the person who created Marozzi Bind, which is still very popular. And just look at this same eye for detail. When c5 comes, he plays a4, so no b5, no freeing of that. He simply develops. He's already been developing for a long time. He's not afraid of having an isolated queen pawn. No worries around that. And he's now ready to launch a kingside attack. All the pieces are in place. Knight e5, a logical move. Black played rook fd8, and he follows it up with f4. Bishop e8. Played knight g4. He wants to remove whatever number of defenders he can. Rook into d4. Punctures the king side. And brings another knight in. So black did not see much point in attacking, the defending with king g7 because of queen g4 check. Queen f5 was not possible because of rook c5, I think. And also the knight can jump attacking the queen sometimes. So maybe this was an option, but I think Alekhine is prepared to play like this. Black anyway played here rook ad8, knight f6, king f8, knight h7, king e7, and he completely rips it apart again, f5. Rook to d6, and now a very nice finish, starting with b4. The queen has nowhere to go, so must take. Queen e5. Multiple threats. Queen h8, threatening what? Okay, no, queen h8 is just a move. f8 and f6 both are protected. Probably he's threatening f6 check. Queen e5, queen h8. Black played rook d3. And now f6 check. Black resigned here. If he goes king d8, then this is a very nice mate. And if he takes if he takes knight f6, then this is just over. Mate. So this was Alexander Alekhine. I did not really choose his extremely complicated wins. I just chose very simple. I have chosen some more games, but I don't think we have time to go over all of them. So this was the era of the Titans, I would say. These were people who were completely different. They were, they could play at amazing success rate and all the right moves. without any fault and almost flawlessly, what to say. But in 1938, in the late, I would say in the mid 30s, already the revolution had started. When people started to look upon chess as a science. And in science, like I said before, in science, when any sport is associated to science, it becomes a complete sport. Because then you can analyze everything in acute, in like, acute details. You can go on finalizing, you're trying to find the truth, what angle will work best, what will not. We see amazing, videos every now and then that somebody can actually, playing billiards and he hits one ball and that ball can jump and do whatnot, circus kind of thing. We see extremely fine table tennis games or badminton games these days because, the science has basically helped them learn the angles, how to sweat, how to exercise better, which muscle to use, and etc. I mean, it's a very long story, but it's the same in chess. So when chess became science, this was because thanks to the efforts of one man, Mikhail Botvinnik, the 5th world champion, who thought that, okay, the strategy of Stenitz is great. There is no doubt about it. The psychology of Lasker obviously plays its part. The simplicity and skills of Capablanca and Alekhine for his, of course, exceptional combinational vision. I mean, they are all part of the game as well. There is no denying that. But can I not analyze and find out the truth behind every position? Now, this is when the science came in. Botvinnik was also the first person ever in the history of chess to advocate the use of computers in chess. So when we are talking about 1950s, the era when computers was just barely in the process of building themselves up. Computers were not a reality of computers like today. Today, it's not even computer age, it's a robotics age. A robot can do so many things for you. I mean, for us human beings, they've been developed like that. And the future probably belongs to artificial intelligence now, which is obviously the in thing. But all this took part in the era of Botvinnik's line of thinking that computers can play a very, very serious role in making chess a great sport. So his fundamentals in chess basically belong to a few mantras. One of his main mantra was that I will analyze chess for 300 days in a year. I will play chess for maybe 60 days and about 5 days in a year, I'll take rest. So this is how he would sum up his 365 days. I learned it from someone when I was a young kid, and it has still remained in my memory. I don't know how far this is true, but it sounds at least true. So Botvinnik had a very simple mantra, but before Botvinnik became actually the world champion, this was only in 1948. So Alekhine died as the world champion. Then Botvinnik became the new world champion after a tournament was played. So Botvinnik was the first player who became world champion without playing a world championship match. He in fact played a world championship tournament. Okay, in which the top players of the world came together. They all played, and Botvinnik won for the first time in 1948. And then, okay, I think till 1963. He was on and off the world champion, like he lost it twice, but regained it. In 1963, he decisively lost it to, like for the last time, he lost his world championship to Petrosian. Petrosian again defeated Spassky first and then lost to Spassky in 1969. And in 1972, Spassky lost to Fischer in the famous Fischer versus Spassky match. And after that, Karpov became world champion without playing a match. Without playing any match, any tournament. He won by default the world championship title because Fischer never came to play. And after that, Kasparov. After Kasparov, it was Kramnik. then Anand, and now we finally have Magnus. So it was already in 1938 that Botvinnik's vision was at display. So we'll just quickly see a very famous game played by him against Capablanca. This was played in 1938, so 10 years before he won the World Championship. And in this game, he played to the, basically, they would analyze the games of their opponents and find out situations where my opponent is weak. Okay, this is what even Magnus, like I told you, Magnus Carlsen did the same against Nepomniachtchi and won it very, very easily, probably his easiest world championship. Okay, the reason was the analysis part. He knows exactly what not to give to Nepomniachtchi. And he was successfully able to do that, so he won very easily. Now, back in this era of 1938, this Botvinnik was who will be the next world champion? I don't know. If Magnus says that he will play only if Firoza qualifies, I don't know. I think the next world champion, let us taste the present world championship for now. I don't think it's easy to predict, because maybe Firoza is a favorite, or at least one of the huge favorites to win the next candidates. But I don't think it's going to be easy for Firoza, because there are people like, there is obviously Caruana, there will be MVL, there will be probably likes of Anish Giri. We still have a few spots left. There is Timur Rajabo. Now, all these are very extremely experienced players. And, Firoza is still a young blood. I'm not sure if Firoza will be able to win the candidates to challenge Magnus. And then Magnus has indicated that he may not play the next world championship. It's a bit complicated, but I think for Magnus, for the next 2 years, at least, I can assure you that Magnus, 2 or maybe 4 years also, Magnus is going to be the top player of the world. I don't think there is anyone, even if there is a match against Firoza, my money would be on Magnus for the next 2, at least for the next 2 world championships, because I think he plays way ahead of his time already. Okay, so let's come back to here. Yeah, so they would analyze the situations and they would reach certain conclusions. So while analyzing Capablanca's positions, Botvinnik might have realized that there's a certain factor called hidden dynamics. So there are open dynamics, which everybody can see and say, oh, it's a very dynamic position, anything can happen. And there are some hidden dynamics. The dynamics will happen after, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 10 moves. Okay. So this is a different situation. So hidden dynamics, probably, this is what Kasparov has mentioned while analyzing these games, that probably Capablanca had not faced much of the hidden dynamics. So Botvinnik goes for a position which had hidden dynamics in it. And he catches him completely off guard. So here Black was able to successfully change. I think Bishop B2 was a clearly mistake. He should have played here Queen D3 directly, and the game will be on familiar lines. Queen D7. And now, because Queen D3 means Queen A4 is coming, so A4 had to be played. This was not necessary had he played Queen D3 first. Anyway, like I said, great games don't become great without mistakes. So there are mistakes from both sides. Queen D3. And now Capablanca played C4. He fell for the trap. He thought that he will bring his knight to B3, like I've shown here in the arrows. And then he can win the A pawn maybe, and then he will. And he did not see that there are hidden dynamics. He did not see much of White's attack or counterplay happening here. That was a serious oversight, because Botvinnik had analyzed this position in depth. This position is still played at the highest level. I mean, the plan which Botvinnik introduced in this game. In this particular structure, White should always play F3, E4, E5 and try to conduct a kingside attack. And this is what probably escaped Capablanca's intentions completely. Or he maybe he just thought like, even if it comes what, I will defend. So he started with his plan, knight b8, knight c6. White is happy. Knight a5 is what he played. One important detail, if knight e4 had happened, Botvinnik had this very, very smart move in his mind, with the idea of playing f3 followed by knight g3 again. Yeah. So knight g3, knight a5, and now f3, knight b3. Both sides are quite happy, you know. Capablanca got what he wanted. Botvinnik got what he wanted. So why black wins a pawn here. It's a very famous game. I will not be surprised if most of you have seen it. Okay, now, yeah, after this move was played, now black is bringing the knight to c5 and taking it to d3. So it is imperative that white should move the queen, which he does. g6, f4, f5. So, you know, the position is now opening up. Like I said, the hidden dynamics have now come to the fore. f5, completely getting closer to the black king. Rook e1, rook e1, rook e8. Capablanca thought he can still defend. This is a tactical trick. He wants to trade some pieces. Now came this remarkable move, rook e6. Rook into e6, f into e6, king g7. Queen f4. Queen e8. Queen e5. Queen e7. And now came this amazing move, bishop a3. Anybody, tell me anybody who has seen this game? At least this position? Yeah, bishop a3, yeah, of course, Abhishek, yeah, Rajat, yeah. But, you know, it's easier to say, or we know for sure that we have seen this, but like I said, a lot of hard work was put behind such a scenario and such a beautiful game, because to realize that, you know, that Capablanca hidden dynamics and then, you know, attack, and this is how you need to approach him, this is how you need to beat him. All this takes a very, very considerable effort, and this is what Botvinnik's gift was to the world, the chess world rather. Yeah. And with this, he defeated Capablanca for the first time in his life in 1938. In the same tournament, he defeated Alekhine also. And this time the approach was totally different. I will just tell you very quickly. We are really now out of time. CD4, ED4, and bishop E7. Now you just see what he goes for. You know, with Capablanca, he was fighting for initiative. He was looking for a dynamic position. Against Alekhine, he goes for a complete symmetry. Because in dynamics, Alekhine was superior player than probably Botvinnik was. So here he is choosing symmetry. So this is what I'm saying. This is science. You analyze, you find out the truth, and then you work in accordance with the situation. Whatever the situation demands, you work in accordance with that. This is what science essentially is. Bishop d7 he played, and like I said, he's not afraid to play any endgame. He's not afraid, as long as now he's got better development, not afraid to exchange one pair of rooks, goes for the endgame quickly. This is what Alekhine precisely did not like. You know, small endgames where opponent has a small advantages and opponent is trying to trouble him. Maybe the position is not hopeless, but it was an exceptional display by Botvinnik from this position. He played knight e1 here, h5, and he played h4 here. And nothing happened. He played just knight d7, ignoring. Again, he went rook c7, and knight f3. This is known as the pendulum maneuver. Knight e1, knight f3, knight e1 again. He goes back. It's called a pendulum maneuver. This game is famous because of this particular maneuver. Knight f3, knight e1, and then knight f3 again, and then knight e1 again. f5, and he just stops, forcing him to play f4. Played f3, fixing the f pawn now. Take, a5, closing the queen side. And there will be enough time to pick up, one pawn after the other. All the pawns are going to fall. Black has such a terribly placed rook that he is in no position. And first one goes. Second one will go now. Third one will fall soon. And it's really resigned here. Yeah. So, yeah. Yes. So very clearly, I mean, like I said, this is all about science, having a scientific approach and using science as the means to analyze and to decipher and then eventually to conquer. With these words, my friend, I think I would rest my case as far as the evolution of chess is concerned. So we started with tenets. The first part was all about strategy, and then we moved on to psychology. Then we moved on to simplicity and importance of endgames, then absolutely great combinations and tactical vision. All this is core competence in chess. And chess got its current form thanks to the effort of Botvinnik, like I said, when it was an art form, as we said, before it actually became a sport when the first world championship was announced. Then from art form, it became a sport, and from sport, it became a science. And now it's a complete sport because it's an art, it's a sport as well as a science. I think we can just give the mic to everyone if they have questions instead of asking me here through chat. It might be just better. Yeah.
Yes. Now I will unmute all now.
Yes, please.
And I may start also with a question, please. Just a personal
yes,
question.
Sure. Of course.
Yeah. First, how did you train before getting the IM title? And then how did you train after being an international master up to now?
Okay, for me, it is, they say that there are no bad students, only bad teachers. Okay, so I believed in this one thing, and I just thought, like, no matter what, I'll try, and whoever approaches me for training, I'll try and bring out the best. And I was also a bit lucky, because chess was already going through a revolution when I started training. So I started my chess coaching career back in 1995, 96. And this was precisely the time when, India from one grandmaster, we had only one grandmaster in 1987. By 94, we had only 3 grandmasters. This was when I started training. And many young players who would later become grandmasters, they started training under me. Now, this included somebody like a Hari Krishna, for example, who is now a world top 20 player. So I've trained Hari Krishna in his formative years, I think till about he became a grandmaster. And after that, it's not like I was his only trainer, but I was also one of the trainers. I was working with him constantly. But he must have also benefited working with other people. So I'm just saying that, that was a lucky period when a lot of good activities, good things are going on, especially in Indian chess. A lot of players are coming up. And then I obviously got exposed to a lot of trainers worldwide. Then we started sharing some ideas, etc. So I've worked with some really, really exceptional trainers like Lev Sakis, for example, Vladimir Chuchilov, Vladimir Chuchilov is the coach of Anish Giri today. and then also, of course, Evgeny Vladimirov, and like this, a lot of people whom we could, share ideas, trade ideas. Elispa Robilava, who was Anand's second for like more than 7-8 years. There's so many people that I got to interact and work with, and that was great learning. And slowly we were able to use those ideas into, for your own students, and then take them to the next level. And it's a process that will take some time. It's not like it's not going to happen overnight.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
And
Hi, everybody. Hi, Mr. Abey and
Yes.
Mr. Sarin. So it's a pleasure to meet you and to have this interesting and beautiful class. So I have many questions, but I'm going to summarize. Well, is there a book of the history of India in chess? Because it's really, really impressive how you grow in time. And also another question that is totally apart from this is like more technical. It's about if you recommend a book to improve the calculation process in chess.
Well, actually, Majoy, yeah, that's how you pronounce. Yeah. So
It's Marjorie.
Majoy, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, you're from Philippines, yeah? Right? Mhm.
No, I'm from Peru, from South
Peru,
America.
Peru, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Peru, okay. Sorry. I just thought. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, the chess material is available. I mean, there is actually more material than you can ever study. Okay, so what you need is like, yeah, I got it. Away. Thanks. Yeah, so when you say about talking about improving calculation, is there any book? It is very hard to recommend one book. So I would normally my go-to book is Attack and Defense written by Dorotsky and Yusupov together. But it is only, one small part of the story. It is not like the only thing, because, back in the good old days, if you go back, you can see that this wonderful book written by Alexander Kotov, like Think Like a Grandmaster, for example. So Think Like a Grandmaster had, okay, one small part, I would say. In today's world, it can be said, it can be summed up that it was only one small part of how to calculate. Then Dorotsky expanded it a little bit. Then Karasenko expanded it a little bit. Jakub Agard expanded it a little bit. So everybody has their own version, but probably a mixture of all the versions is the best thing to do. It's not like, because it's very hard to imagine that certain position Dorotsky will say that you have to find the prophylaxis here. But when you're playing in a chess tournament, nobody is going to come and tell in your ears that you have to find the prophylaxis. You have to have that feel to understand that here the prophylaxis will work. Here this is a concrete position, so I have to analyze. Here this is a combination must be coming, or here I have to sacrifice something, or here I have to defend something. So every position has got different demands, is what I'm trying to say. And it is not so easy. This comes with a lot of experience and a lot of hard work. I would recommend a mixture of the people that I said. Like, everybody expanded on their own systems and on their own experiences, and it makes sense. So for example, I also follow a very simple methodology. Apart from all these people, I have also formulated a very simple three questions that you must ask yourself: what is to be done, why it should be done, and then finally how it should be done. So what is to be done is the simplest. Then once your mind knows what is to be done, then it guides you in a certain direction. Then why is the convincing part, because if you know why it is to be done, then it's very easy to do it. So there is, in fact, a Chinese saying which goes something like this: the person who knows how to do one thing will always be working for the person who knows why to do this. So the how part is probably the easiest. You can find out many ways to do how to reach a certain conclusion, or how to reach a certain position. But why you need to do it is because, for example, this game or the games that we was looking at before this, I mean, that's a time-taking process. So apart from everything else, you can also include these three simple questions: what, why, and how. So when you're thinking during the course of a game, you just say what to think, and then you can talk about how, why must I do this? And if you're convinced that this is the right way forward, and then how it is to be done, how is always the easiest part. Okay, so this is what it is. So it's not so easy to explain. Maybe another session and another time we can do a complete course on calculation in the same amount of hours. Yeah.
And thank you very much. This give me a lot of light. So yeah, thank you.
Pleasure. How you prepare for a serious tournament? Abhishek, I don't know at what level you play, first of all. So you're what to say? I don't know what your judgment of a serious tournament is, but I suspect that actually all the tournaments should be serious tournaments only. Otherwise, what is the point? I mean, like you don't play tournaments where you're not serious, right? Do you play to lose your games? No, right? You always want to win no matter what. So yeah, you are saying the time control is 90 plus 30, but okay, I think even if it is 3 minutes, it's okay, or 1 minute also is okay. It just depends. So it's not like, this is like, your question is more like asking me that how to prepare for an exam. Whereas we are talking about sport, not academics or examination. So in sport, we work, you can't say to a Roger Federer or a Virat Kohli or a Messi that, okay, now the World Cup is coming, you have to train for 15 days. They have to train whole year, every day, right? A very few days on which they can take rests. So it is not like, it should not be always, never it should be taken up like this, that I have a tournament coming, so I want to prepare chess. You have to do this because you want to do this, and you must do it every day. I mean, as far as possible. I don't know what your situation is, which class are you in, and okay, you will have your own compositions. But what I'm saying is, there is no recipe. There is no recipe for success. You have to create your own recipe always. Yeah, do you have some more? Any more questions?
Yes, Mr. Vishal again.
Yeah.
Yeah, you spoke about the history of chess. I would like you to tell us about history of chess in India, especially Mr. Omar Koya, his efforts to develop chess. Mr. Omar Koya was maybe once he was a vice president, maybe one of the vice presidents of FIDE.
Okay, I mean, look, I'm not taking anything away, from Mr. Koya. I mean, he was obviously, he was a secretary also, and he did things in his own right, and he's unfortunately no more. I think he expired a couple of years back, and well, unfortunately no more. But he was a great friend. I mean, like I knew him personally, and he knew most of us personally only. He was it's like the Indian chess history is not creation of one guy. If you want to attribute it to one single person, then it has to be Viswanathan Anand, nobody else. So somebody who has given us the path to success in Indian chess. It is not an organizer or a former secretary or anyone else. It has to be Viswanathan Anand. He is the flag bearer of chess in country. And obviously, I mean, there was chess in the 1930s also in this country, when we had a great player in Mir Sultan Khan, who defeated both Alekhine and Capablanca in England. That time also we had players. We had a certain Manuel Aaron, who played with Fischer, for example, in a tournament, and he was the first international master of India. Then we had Vishwanathan Anand becoming the first grandmaster, and then everything changed. So I think it has to be more about Anand than about anyone else. If we talk about the history of Indian chess and the changes that it has taken, we all need a hero, and that hero is normally not an administrator. That hero is always a star that we look up to. And Vishwanathan Anand has been the shining star for us Indians. For us Indians in chess, obviously, there's no one else.
Wow. Please, I have a question. Yeah, I know that there's it's about the chess history. It's really, really impressive how you advance and how you develop in chess. And I'm not pretty sure. I want to ask to be sure because I want to share this information with my friends here in Peru, because Peru has few grandmaster, but we have a lot of people who love chess and who are really enthusiastic in chess. But
Of course,
sometimes we have to,
you have this brother sister duo, which is Desi Kori and
yeah,
yeah,
Jorge
yeah,
Cori, the Cori siblings,
hmm.
Jorge and Daisy. Yeah, they are
Yeah,
my
yeah.
friends. They,
Jorge, yeah, yeah, yes. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I've seen them play in junior world championships, etc. So many times, yeah.
yeah. So the question is how? It's because here in Peru we don't have like ITT's tournament because we don't have like official arbiters. So that's why we're really grateful and we say thanks to Mr. Ebay and the Tattoo Chess Academy, because now we have 3 more FIDE arbiters. So the question is, it's how? It's not only the chess players, it's also like international tournaments and also people who take really seriously like chess. Not only the players, also the trainers and like a lot of people like trainers and arbiters, organizers. I think that is a big uh, group who take serious chess in order to become like one of the biggest country in the world, because now India is one of the biggest uh, country in the world about chess.
No, this is okay. But my point here is very simple and clean. That Rajat, I'll come back to you. Just give me a second. The thing is that it has taken. Anand became a grandmaster in 1987. That was almost like 33 years now.
Yeah.
So it has taken years after the first grandmaster. It has taken us 30 years to build what we are today.
Wow.
And I think you will need some time because you need somebody to reach at the top, and then people look up to him. I used to admire one of your players, and I played him a few times also. I was very lucky, Granda Yoniga. Yeah, and I happened to play with him in some European tournaments many years back. And he was an exceptional chess player. Of course, there is no doubt about it. What he called himself, I think, a Peruvian farmer or something. Yeah, so, yeah, that's he would jokingly call himself. But he was obviously a very strong player. But okay, this is not enough. You probably need somebody, either amongst the girls or the boys, somebody to take that giant leap forward, get into the world top 10 at least. It's a slow process, again, for anything to become. Like in India, it has grown many folds because, after Anand, like I said, in 1995, we had only 3 grandmasters. But since then, now we have what, 72?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just think about it. And many have happened in the last 10 years. Most of them have happened actually in the last 10 years, 50 grandmasters, maybe in the last 10 years. So it's like, wow, this is just a process. I mean, it is just like, you sow something and you can't expect, if you're trying to build a tree, you can't expect it to give you, any fruit in 6 months. The tree has to become a tree first. Only then it will start to bear fruits, right? I mean, in a very early stage, it is impossible to bear fruits from a tree. I mean, like if you plant a tree. So it's very clear and simple, and that's it. Yeah. Okay, Rajat. There are thousands and thousands of chess books I can recommend to you. I have a very simple recommendation here. There is a video done uh, by V Saravanan on YouTube, where he's talking about chess books. Saravanan is a friend. You can simply go see that video. It's a pretty long video. It'll give you a very in-depth idea about good chess books. So it's hard to name, 5 or 10 or 20. I mean, I'm telling you, you are spoiled for choices as far as the chess material is concerned. It is just that how much time you have. Abhishek Shankar is asking how to develop good blindfold skills. Why do you want blindfold skills? You want to calculate better. Probably is that what you mean? Because I think that is what is most important. And yeah, this is done with a lot of practice by solving a lot of different kind of positions, ranging from strategy to prophylaxis to sometimes, what am I missing? What are the moves which, I mean, my position looks good, but what am I missing? And like I said, yeah, like you add all those things, and then also you add what, why, and how to play, what, why, and how method also. And that's it. I think you are done, and your calculation skills will skyrocket, and you will see the result in very quick time. Calculation is, I mean, I believe in three things that you need to become a good chess player. One is obviously, one of them is calculation. The second is the skills related to your memory. And the third is the skills related to your comparison skills. So if your memory is good, then you will, obviously, if you have seen thousands of chess games, you will always find some similarity with the position on board. So which is where, you can compare from what is in your head to with what is on the board. And then the third skill is to calculate. After that, calculation part becomes easier, but you need to train yourself in all the three skills. Yeah, Avi.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there is a question in Arabic. Some guys asking about the level of 2000, rating of 2000. How to train, how to upgrade this level up. So I think this question is important because maybe most of the guys would be between 2000 and 2200. So most of the players are in this range, and later on we will arrange private sessions with you.
No, this is fine.
Maybe most of them will be in this. So yeah.
Yeah. So,
most of them will be in this level.
No. I understand what you're saying. What we need to do is, like I said, so development of chess skills beyond the 2000 level, is that what your question is, Obey?
The question for the guys for over 2000, or if you are in the level of 2000 and you want to reach 2200, yes, for example. So what advice for this range of players?
First of all, you need to be far better in calculations for the next level, because 2200 is the next level, obviously. So to improve the calculation skill, obviously, and then to keep, every day, it should not be linked to your performance. It should be linked to your learning. So if you can become, that saint who says that what did I learn today instead of how did I perform today, then I think a lot of things will happen for the good. So the performance, because sometimes 2000 can become 1900 and 1900 can go to 1700. This can happen in a bad tournament, but especially if you're young. But because this K factor and all this nonsense, there's so many things. But the most important aspect that I feel is a constant learning has to happen. One. Secondly, you have to up the ante as you are progressing. So personally, I believe that you need to master about 30 positions to become a grandmaster in chess. Just 30 positions should be more than enough. So if you know the ins and out of 30 middle games, 30 end games, arising out of your own openings, of course. And I think this is more than enough, but this is easier said than done. It takes years to master this. Okay. So you should start looking at the specifics once you have crossed 1800, 1900 levels. Like what is it that you exactly like to do? So some people have different likings. Some people want to go for the attack. So their repertoire should be built around that, totally around attack. Some people like to, take things easy, try to make use of small advantages like stinets and stuff. It is simply a matter of character. And there is nothing wrong in being an attacking player. There is nothing wrong being a very normal chess player who just wants to take advantage of small things and keep going forward. Sometimes like I said, sometimes things will not fall in line, so don't get dejected and keep working. I mean, like keep trying to find your own positions on the board. That is the key for the next level always. And then from 2200 it becomes more intense. For 2400, from 2400 to 2500 it becomes more intense. I've seen it like in the last 20 years so many times that I can vouch for it that it is actually not. It's easier said than done, but all the same, there are so many people who are achieving it almost every day these days that I don't see why anybody cannot. Yes, I think we're done for the day. Abhay?
Okay, so is that enough, guys?
Yes, I hope so. I have an important meat plant, so I actually need to rush now. I thought this would be over sooner. Anyways, it was nice talking to all of you, and look forward to some opportunities to work together. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. Pleasure is all mine.
Peru. Bye.
Yeah. Abhay, bye. Abhay, I'll be in touch with you, and you can let me know once you post it on the YouTube.
Yeah, okay. So guys, you can follow on the YouTube channel or the Telegram channel. And we thank Mr. Vishal Sareen. Again, he's a member of the Trainers Commission. He's an IM, he's a FIDE senior trainer. So we hope that we will meet him later on in more specific lectures, more concentrating on private lessons maybe. So we will see. So this is just like an introductory workshop for him, for guys to know him. So later on, if you need any assistance, just contact our academy or contact me, and then we will arrange anything for you, and we'll arrange the certificates and everything with Mr. Vishal Sareen. Thank you again, Mr. Vishal Sareen.
Thank you, Abhay, and we'll be in touch on this. It was great working with you all. I look forward to more opportunities. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.